Hello, it is June 30th, 2025, and yesterday I completed reading Morte d'Arthur, which is King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table by Sir Thomas Malory. This is going to be a long review because it's a big book and it's quite one of a kind, I would say. Well, the first part is it's leather bound, very nice book, and it's got great images within and without. I'll show you the back front cover. So that's a black and white and color graphic, but it's got a lot of graphics in the book as well that are black and white, like etchings, it looks like. And it is, how many pages is it? It's quite long. 749 pages. So you're going to be in for a long haul. And I'll go into one thing that's good if you wanted to treat this like a coffee table book, which I suggest is probably the best way to do it. It's got an introduction that gives you a lot of background on the legends, but skipping that for now, I'm going to go right to the chapters, which have headings that give you a basic description of what's going to happen in each chapter. And it's also written in several different books, is what they're called. So it actually goes up to book 21. And the very beginning of it is quite great, and the very ending of it is quite great. And then in the middle, around book 10, for literally about 200 pages, it gets quite monotonous and boring, where it's nothing but fighting, jousting, fighting. And unless you want to live at medieval times and watch that kind of situation for a while, you may need to space that out a bit because it does get very monotonous. Now I'm going to go into some of the very interesting tidbits, and they're going to be spoilers. So if you don't want to get through this, you'll be interested to read all of my individual little notes that I took as I went through it. If you do want to read it, when I get to those notes, you may want to skip that part or listen with your button on the pause just in case. But what this is basically a compilation of legends. And there's several different versions of the King Arthur legends. So if you're like most people in America, you probably only heard of The Sword and the Stone from Disney. And you probably also have heard of Excalibur and think that it's the same sword. It is not. And this goes into great detail on both of those things. And so you may be like me going, I've heard of that stuff my whole life and I don't really know anything about it. There is some historical debate on whether King Arthur was a real king. And then, of course, how many of these events in this book happened or did not happen or were dramatized to the point of absurdity. And some of them, it seems to me, have to be just fake because some of it comes across as crazy. Now, I will tell you, Sir Thomas Malory wrote or compiled this, I guess, in prison. And he was a political prisoner for a long time in separate segments of his life. And apparently he had access to library while in prison. It's like being locked up in the tower with the library, I guess. Not like a prison cell with nothing available to him. So he basically compiled some of these things. And whether he modified some of these legends or not, I'm not sure. And you'd have to compare notes because some of these individual stories that exist in other books have variants that are different. So the outcome of King Arthur is different in different legends. And I'm only going to address the ones that are in this book because I'd never heard most of them. So let's get into it. I've got 26 tidbits. And at the beginning, I just started randomly writing these down. I didn't do them in the order that I read them. So they may be a little bit wonky, but you're going to get the gist of some of this stuff. the very beginning of it. Now, this is the spoiler alert section, so if you don't want to hear this stuff, then, tune out. So Merlin apparently used his magic powers to transform a guy to look like a king so that the guy could sleep with the king's wife. And apparently that resulted in the pregnancy and birth of Arthur that would later become king. And as far as the sword, I talked about the sword a little bit. I'm going to jump around here. Excalibur was apparently brighter than 30 torches, and he received that from the Lady of the Lake. And what was bizarre to me, I was thinking about, if it's brighter than 30 torches, is it some kind of a weapon left by alien life forms on this planet that someone just happened to find? Who's the Lady of the Lake, and why is she handing over the Excalibur to people? And it's like, it made me think of like a lightsaber. If it's brighter than 30 torches, now that could be just a dramatized way of saying that it's made out of some special shiny, steel or whatever. There's another story about the spear that was used to stab the side of Jesus and how the blood healed the guy. There was the round table was an actual round table. So you've heard of the Knights of the Round Table. It was a gift to Arthur for marrying this guy's daughter. And then I've mentioned the jousting. There was tons of cutting off heads. And before I go into that, I'm going to tell you that the women are treated horribly in this book, almost like non-life forms, almost really, really just bad. And women get their heads cut off as often, perhaps maybe more often than the men do, which is shocking and brutal. So a guy told a guy's wife that he killed the dude, and then he started sleeping with her. And the guy that was supposed to be dead found them in bed together. That was an interesting story. There's a lot of weird animals and creatures in this thing. There was a dragon attack in one story. There were cannibal giants that were keeping people locked up in a castle and eating them, I guess. There was the healing from four waters that came out of paradise, which apparently they knew the location of the original Garden of Eden, and the waters that came out of there were supposed to have healing powers. There were the conquests of King Arthur, where he went on these rampages and just started attacking other kingdoms because they were on the verge of attacking his, it seemed. And it got a little bit weird because it felt like, religious holy war kind of situation almost, and just made me feel icky. So again, the sword and the stone is not Excalibur, and there's a thing called the questing beast that ate a guy's horse, and he went after him, and this questing beast had like the body of, what was it, a lion, and a tail of a serpent. It's like this multiple mixed monsters. So if you're interested in monsters, you might want to look up what the questing beasts look like. The most ridiculous story in this whole book was a guy lost his head, and a woman put some ointment on it and restored his chopped off head. And he came back and attacked the same guy that had chopped off his head. And in this time, they actually diced his head into multiple small pieces. And you could never guess what's going to happen next. She takes the same ointment and glues the pieces of the head back together, and the guy comes back to life again. And just weird. I mean, so that story right in there gives you an idea about the reason of the historical debate of a lot of this stuff, because, unless there was some crazy magic going on back then, I don't think you can glue a guy's cut off head back together. There were some poisonings that occurred in this book, and some by people that ended up being in peril, and then some that actually got away with it. There was what's called a love drink, which I thought was kind of funny. These people were going to get together, and they gave them the love drink. They never really went into too much detail. I don't remember. If maybe you could look that up too, but there was a love drink. Then they had what I would call a beauty contest of death. where one king is talking to another king and basically saying that every year or so often, every 7 years, whatever it was, they have this contest where the one guy says, my queen looks better than your queen, and we'll let the crowd decide, and whoever's wrong, their queen gets put to death. I thought, oh, that's nice, but the queens love that. A knight cut off his mom's head because she was in bed with a lover. Lancelot dressed as a woman to kill a guy. There's a lot in this book about Lancelot and Tristan. So if you've heard of Sir Lancelot or Sir Tristan, you're going to hear about them. There's a serpent and a lion fight each other. And in that situation, there's people riding them too, which I was talking to my son, and it's pretty much near impossible to ride a lion. So that's a questionable story too. There was a talking fire cloud that God basically used to speak out of. So with some of these stories, they come across almost like biblical. There's one that's bordering on a vampiric story where this woman who was ill, I think she was leprous, she needed the blood sacrifices of women regularly to keep her alive. And there was a detailed story about the one that sacrificed herself to save the one woman. And then it was considered, when these other knights showed up, as like this evil place, and they were addressing that and making sure it didn't happen anymore. There was in chapter 22 a really bizarre, Jesus and angels appear, and the knights are having communion of Christ's actual flesh, which was really kind of weird. And then they had the spear and the grail with them at that time, which they went on a hunt for the Holy Grail in this book too, which a lot of that stuff that you see in Monty Python's Search for the Holy Grail, where it's quite comedic, you can see where it come from, because a lot of this stuff just sounds like it's insane in this book. It does. So anyway, at this point, the spear was returned to heaven. It like ascended, and they said it was the end of the Grail quest. I couldn't tell if the Grail went back to heaven also, but it sounded like it might have. Either that, or it was hidden somewhere, like on Earth somewhere else. There was an adder snake that caused a battle between a group because it bit this knight on the foot or something, and they thought he was attacking, so then they ended up having a big fight. There was Excalibur at the end was thrown back to the Lady of the Lake. And the most touching, which is kind of weird because it was a love triangle between Lancelot, King Arthur, and the Queen. Apparently, Lancelot had been banging the Queen in secret, and it was a super sad ending because it basically caused the death of Arthur, and then the Queen felt like she's a total betrayer, and she became a nun and everything, and she's end up dying, and then Lancelot ends up starving himself to death. And for some reason, they showed Lancelot's naked corpse for everybody to see. They said that was a thing of the time, was laying out dead naked knights, I guess. I don't know. But this is an oversimplification of all of what's going on in there. Like I said, there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of really weird, interesting excerpts in here, but you kind of got to hunt to find them. So if you get to the point where you can't just read it straight through, then I suggest that you read the chapter headers again and kind of read what they're about. So I'll just give you this one. This is chapter 3 in book 21. How after Sir Gawain's ghost appeared to King Arthur and warned him that he should not fight that day. So it tells you what's the warning and why he shouldn't go, and he probably should have listened. But you can kind of read and see which ones sound the most interesting to you and kind of skim this thing. Or you can alternatively read about all the weird legends of King Arthur without purchasing the book. If you wanted to do that, you could see all the strange tidbits. But I still suggest that it's better as a coffee table piece because it is quite beautiful. And you could thumb through and just read a few at a time and then put it down rather than trying to read it from front to back. it is an enigma. It's something like I've never read before. Some parts are just ridiculous. Some parts were profound. Some were almost like reading a biblical passage, which is weird. And it just makes you wonder about, like the serpents and, you know, giants and things of that nature. How much of this stuff is true, if any of it? Is it just meant to be entertainment? I don't know. But it was still an interesting read. It's not really a book per se, but if I had to compare it to, um, there is another book that I went through that was like I can't remember the name, Canterbury Tales. Canterbury Tales was nowhere near as good as this. And if you read Canterbury Tales and enjoyed it, you're going to probably like this as much, at least, or way better. I didn't really like Canterbury Tales that much. I like this a lot more. That said, in the middle, I think it's book 10, maybe book 9 and book 10, it starts getting really draggy. So you could probably get to through book 8 and feel totally fine. And then when you get to book 9 and 10, you might want to either pace yourself or skim those a little bit. And then after book 10, start getting back into the full read of it, perhaps, because I went 200 pages straight and I was like, wow, this is really, it was kind of like when I read all of Shakespeare's stuff, really opened up my eyes about how brutal humankind has been over the centuries. And it makes you feel sad for the world about how much violence there was and is. Yeah, we haven't learned much, I guess, other than our weaponry is more distant. And yeah, I don't know. It was really bad back then. If the battling in this is true and not exaggerated, man, they just went off and killed people for basically no reasons. And a lot of it was like, I can do it because I have favor from above. And it's totally contrary to what the Bible says about turning the other cheek and all the things that Jesus said, but yet they quote Jesus in here a lot. And what was weird about Jesus is they referred to him as Jesu, Jesu Christ, not Jesus, but Jesu. You have to get used to some of the weird spellings. The Grail is not called the Grail; it's called something else. It's got this goofy. Let's see, probably can't find it on the fly here, but where is it? No, I can't find it on the fly. Anyway, the Grail is a goofy name. You'll see it and you go, what is that word? You'll be doing a lot of looking up of words if you read this book. But I liked it.